he had said this week that he didn't want to get ahead of the line, but he said, I want to make sure we demonstrate to the American people that it is safe to take. And these aren't the first senior lawmakers who have said that they will take a vaccine publicly to boost public confidence. You had former presidents, Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, who have also said previously and separately in statements that they would be willing to take a vaccine publicly just to give that additional extra confidence to the American people.
That was Chikruti Deve reporting. President-elect Joe Biden will nominate Deborah Howland to serve as the first Native American Interior Secretary to oversee the country's vast natural resources, including tribal lands. The Democratic Congresswoman from New Mexico is a tribal member of Laguna Pueblo. Her nomination is expected to mark a turning point for a 171-year-old institution that's often had a fraught relationship with the country's over 570 federally recognized tribes. Senior British Minister Michael Gove says any deal on post-Brexit trade with the European Union will need parliamentary approval before December 31st, and he put the chances of success at less than 50%. He also says any possible disruption at Britain's ports after Britain ends its status quo transition period with the European Union and introduces new customs rules will be short-lived. His downbeat tone was in sharp contrast with remarks by the EU's chief negotiator, suggesting there had been good progress as both sides tried to prevent a turbulent finale at the end of this month to 4 years of tortuous discussions. Some of the issues that have dogged the Brexit negotiations between Britain and the EU seem to have been resolved, but there are still things to be worked out ahead of that December 31st deadline. Tony Waterman reports from Brussels.
It was always the level playing field, fisheries, and governance that threatened to torpedo a post-Brexit trade deal. That is, until Wednesday. Speaking at the last scheduled plenary of the year, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen exercised cautious optimism, telling MEPs there was a very narrow path to an agreement.
The path may be very narrow, but it is there. This is now a case of us being so close and yet being so far away from each other.
On the thorny issue of the level playing field, von der Leyen said progress has been made on state aid and that both sides have agreed to benchmark current standards around labor and the environment. Work, though, remains on fully future-proofing fair competition, the main crux of the issue from the beginning, with the UK rejecting the idea of remaining aligned to EU standards come January 1st. In another sign of movement, the Commission chief said issues related to how the deal would be policed have largely been resolved. The major obstacle now is fisheries.
The discussion is still very difficult. And in all honesty, it sometimes feels that we will not be able to resolve this question.
Brussels says it recognizes the UK's sovereignty in its own waters. It just wants predictability for EU fishermen and women. But Downing Street doesn't see it that way. The UK Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, saying he hoped the EU would see sense as he addressed his own parliament.
Every hope I have that our friends and partners across the Channel will see sense and do a deal. And all that takes is for them to understand that the UK has a natural right, like every other country, to want to be able to control its own laws and its own fishing grounds.
The one thing both sides agree on, time is running out, and the next few days will be decisive. There are now just 11 working days left before the end of the year, not taking into account the Christmas holidays or the fact that both the UK and EU parliaments will need to ratify a deal before it takes effect. Negotiators remain hunkered down here in Brussels, trying to deliver just that.
That was Tony Waterman in Brussels. You're listening to the Beijing Hour. Coming up, a new economic cycle in China.
History is made up of stories. Put down that lengthy book spanning thousands of years and instead follow the Makers and Shakers of Chinese History podcast, which presents the biographies of 20 historic figures who shaped the course of ancient China. Meet the most renowned ancient Chinese rulers, ministers, thinkers, scientists, poets and rebels, and find out how they continue to influence the Chinese to this day. Subscribe to Makers and Shakers of Chinese History for free on your favorite podcast app.
16 minutes past the hour. A report by Citibank is highlighting the new economic cycle as China's economy recovers from the COVID-19 pandemic. Timothy Pope spoke with Jamie Wu, investment strategy head at Citi China Consumer Business, about the outlook of China's economy.
Your report mentions a few times this idea of a new economic cycle. I wonder if you could explain to us a bit about what that is.
Well, first of all, this past downturn is caused by the pandemic. So when the virus got contained, we think the economic will recover in a faster way when you compare with past cycles. So that's one of the major features of this new economic cycle. Also, I mentioned that there's a lot of stimulus policies all around the world. So the second feature will be we probably will see lower interest rates for longer term. And third of all, we already see innovations accelerating during this pandemic, and a lot of unstoppable trends, including innovation, digitization, and everything, will probably affect our everyday life.
As the economic fundamentals in China do continue to pick up, as you were talking about, does that mean investors should be looking at more cyclical stocks, or how should they be trying to balance things out?
Broadly speaking, Citi is definitely overweighting equity and underweighting debt. While economic recovery, lower interest rate for longer terms, and some sectors are beaten up and they will play catch up in the future. These are all factors that we think equities will probably outperform bonds in the coming years. As you mentioned, the cyclical sectors, they are among factors that have been negatively impacted during this pandemic. And we already observed some of these outperformance of cyclical stocks in global investment markets, and we think they still have rooms to go up.
The yuan is another factor. It has been on a bit of a tear recently. How is that rally going to affect equities, and will we see more foreign institutional players and even Chinese institutional players getting into the market as a result?
So interest rate differential is one of the major reasons why RMB is appreciating, and we will probably still see that in 2021 because China's interest rate is much higher than some of the developed countries. On the other hand, China is opening up. It's easier to repatriate the investment income, and meanwhile we see a lot of global indexes including Chinese assets, including bonds and equities.